What's up, everybody? My name's Reed.
And I'm Aaron with Trip Time Essentials, and welcome to our psilocybin deep dive.
So today about psilocybin, we're going to be covering history and background, mechanisms of action, strain differences, researched benefits, expected effects, risks and side effects,
administration and dosing, current accessibility, so where is it legal, and other tips. Before we get going, I want to emphasize that this is separate from my role as a licensed psilocybin facilitator.
And this is separate from my role in naturopathic medicine, and we never recommend the use of illegal substances on this channel.
The Trip Time Essentials YouTube channel does not contain medical advice. Always consult a physician regarding medical decisions. All content on this channel is strictly presented for educational, informative, and entertainment purposes only, which is suitable for advertising according to YouTube guidelines.
So continuing to hop right in, we're going to be covering the history and background of psilocybin. So psilocybin-containing mushrooms have been reported to be used in many different cultures historically across the globe, from ancient cultures to modern day.
Yeah, some of the big ones are the Mazatecs, Mixes, Zapotecs, and other cultures in the South American, Latin American region. There's hundreds of different species belonging to at least 7 genera of psilocybin-producing fungi. So tons of different variety here, and we'll get into that more in a little while.
The most used psilocybin-containing mushroom species is psilocybe cubensis. This is what we use here in Oregon as well, the only legal family of mushrooms to be used in Oregon legal psilocybin services.
Yeah, exactly. And to just touch up a little bit more on those Mazatecs, the Maria Sabina is actually a term that takes over for the Mazatec or Mazatopic strain of mushroom. And this comes from the history of how psilocybin mushrooms got introduced to the Western world. So Gordon Wasson met with Maria Sabina and brought mushrooms back. And there's some sad history there, but we don't need to get too much into that.
Yeah, and from their meeting and their ceremony that they did together, kind of exploded in research and development on the Western world there.
Yeah, and since then, so we know a lot about psilocybin at this point. It's one of the most researched psychedelics, and we're going to dive right into the mechanism of action. So the main compound a lot of people have heard of, psilocybin. So this is what actually is contained within the mushroom, and then we consume it, and our body turns that into psilocin. So that whole chemical compound, there's 4-hydroxy-N,N-dimethyltryptamine. You've probably heard of that dimethyltryptamine part, because a lot of these compounds are similar to each other, these serotonergic psychedelics.
And so, right, we talk about psilocybin, you hear that a lot, but then, like Reed had just mentioned, psilocin is the active compound generating the psychedelic effects. And so psilocin binds predominantly to the 5-HT2A, the serotonin 2A receptors within the brain.
Yeah, and it binds at these 2A receptors with a really high affinity. And we also see some activity at the 5-HT1A, but it's much less potent. You can see on the screen there's these inhibitory constants, the Ki. Basically, all this is to show the 6 nanomolar is much stronger than 190 nanomolar. The smaller the number there, the more potent. So basically, psilocybin is really selective to the 5-HT2A. That's mainly where the psychoactive effects are coming from.
We don't even know if that 5-HT1A is really having an effect at this point.
We don't know if it's very relevant in the total spectrum of activity here. We just know it does. So if you took like a ton, you'd probably have more activity at the 1A, but mainly the 2A is what we're concerned with here. And important to note about psilocybin or psilocin specifically is there's no affinity for dopamine D2 receptors, which is different from LSD. LSD has some dopaminergic, adrenergic activity and more stimulating effects. So the psilocin here does not seem to interact directly with dopamine receptors. However, we do see dopamine levels increasing in the nucleus accumbens, this region of the brain, through an indirect mechanism. So while it's not binding to dopamine receptors, there is some activity still happening through dopaminergic pathways.
And we wanted to explain that a little bit extra because there is some confusion around dopamine and how psilocin increases it, how and why.
Yeah, exactly.
So continuing with the mechanism of action here, psilocin also acts on that 5-HT2B receptors more strongly than other psychedelics.
Yeah, and this receptor may cause issues with heart function with chronic dosing. It's super speculative to even say this. I don't want to say one way or the other, but there's been some researchers that have put out concerns regarding microdosing from chronic administration.
And I will say with those studies, coming from the legal side of things, the microdosing level that they were talking about there is maybe a little bit more than what we consider actual microdosing.
Right.
And so that's more of a consistent macro dose level of usage of psilocybin.
Which most people aren't doing.
Yeah, exactly. Most people aren't doing
taking grams and grams a day for a long period of time. It is just important to note, we don't know a lot about this yet. That 2B receptor, we know through other research on other medications, is a concern with constant daily dosing. So it's just something to be maybe very mildly aware of.
Yes, exactly. And there'll be more research done here, right? The industry is really starting to explode into this third wave right now. So we'll see where it goes and what we learn more about that 5-HT2B receptor.
Yeah, and we'll update as soon as we know more through another video. Another really interesting thing that we discovered in researching about psilocin, there's actually SSRI-like effects directly from psilocin. So the serotonin transporter is the target of SSRI medications. And we see that psilocin also inhibits the serotonin transporter, exactly what SSRIs are doing, which I think a lot of people are not aware of. So, and it's actually a moderate level potency at serotonin transporter. So it's kind of like in the same, ballpark as some of the SSRI medications out there in terms of potency. So what this is doing is increasing circulating serotonin levels, basically activating all the different serotonin subtype receptors. And this is probably the real reason for nausea through the 5-HT3 receptors. Rather than psilocin directly binding, it's causing more serotonin.
Yeah, which this is a little bit different than what we talked about in that first video on our channel.
Yeah.
But again, right, with this increase of serotonin levels, probably some of the reason why that nausea is going on at that 5-HT3 receptor with psilocybin usage.
Exactly. And if you're enjoying this video so far, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. We'll be producing way more interesting videos going forward.
Yeah.
So much more content on the way.
And feel free to comment on what videos you'd like us to do next. We're happy to take feedback. So talking a little bit more about strains and strain differences here. This is something that people oftentimes bring up and have questions about. So the actual psilocybin concentrations vary significantly strain to strain. Also, batch of mushroom production to batch of mushroom production.
Exactly.
Right. Even in there is some differences between each mushroom that's grown.
Yeah.
But we're going to go through some researched percentages of psilocybin and what strain in different strains here, and just give a general idea of how variant this can be.
Yeah, and we don't need to dive into each percentage here. It's just kind of maybe to note the outliers. So this research study examined like 5 different strains, found that this creeper strain had 1.36% psilocybin and psilocin. They combined that calculation. And then on the lower end, cubensis contained only 0.879%. So, not a little more than half. And then you have some experience as well with higher percentages and maybe even lower as well.
So with the legal industry coming out, you also see certain mushroom manufacturers, that's what we call them in the legal industry, growers of mushrooms. They're also doing some breeding, right, for some strength and different things, and just combining different strains. And so you see something like Starry Night, which is actually my favorite strain to facilitate with at the current spot. Starry Night has 1.8% psilocybin. Yeah. And so that's very potent in contrast to something like Golden Teacher. Let's say you're trying to consume around 25 or 30 milligrams. It's the difference between maybe 1.6 grams of whole fruit versus, could even be 4 to 5 grams of that Golden Teacher. Yeah. And this can be helpful for a couple different things. Sometimes the actual nausea there that can come from the mushroom itself.
Yeah.
But again, just pointing out the major differences here between concentrations of psilocybin from strain to strain.
Yeah. And it's really interesting. There's also other tryptamines contained in these mushrooms. And a lot of people have no idea that these things exist. So big ones here, and there's a lot, but these are just the most notable, are baeocystin, norbaeocystin, and then the metabolite of baeocystin. So that's called norpsilocin. So when we ingest these things, our body metabolizes them just like with psilocybin turning into psilocin. Baeocystin turns into norpsilocin, and that might actually be more potent than psilocin itself.
Yeah, and all of these contribute to the experience of that psychedelic experience that's going on with the psilocybin, we don't really know what each one is doing and if it's influencing the trip in some way, but those are there and they are varying even more than psilocybin potentially in each strain. Some facilitators, right, some people in the industry may say that they don't believe the strains have that much of a difference, maybe along the lines of psilocybin, but in terms of that, the other tryptamines, like Reed mentioned, the baeocystine, norbaeocystine, these are going to have some influence. We just don't know what that influence looks like.
Much more research going to happen on these things, and it's super interesting. It's exciting. We're going to dive right into the research benefits as well. We have a lot of content here to go over. We're going to start with depression. A 2024 systematic review on psilocybin studies for depression. They took results from 8 different studies, 524 total patients who had depression, and they found that psilocybin consistently provides fast, so rapid, they call it, and enduring, like long-lasting antidepressant effects.
And talking a little about what does that antidepressant effect, timeline look like? The maximum antidepressant effect, so when it's the most potent, is on average 3 to 5 weeks after administration. Again, this is coming from that research systematic review, so there'll be more research done here. But research also suggests that there are sustained antidepressant effects 6 months to a full year and beyond afterwards.
Exactly.
Again, just more research is going to be needed.
Yeah, and psilocybin dosage is unaffected by body weight, which we discovered through researching. So there's kind of some misconception out there. Old research papers used to use dosing based on body weight, and now we've discovered that it's really differences in metabolism between people, difference in liver enzymes that are what affect that dose-response relationship. So,
and some of the reason there why it's not overall body weight is because it's so just acting on the serotonin levels in the brain. Most of our brains are all about the same size and weight, right? So that's not going to be varying as much as overall body weight in each person.
Yeah, and then lastly here, just to compare to the efficacy of ketamine for depression, psilocybin is at least as powerful and durable, and if not more, long-lasting. There's also a higher safety profile with psilocybin versus ketamine. And there's some research, mostly in animal models, that shows more persistent effects with serotonergic psychedelics, including psilocybin, compared to ketamine. So, we see a lot of repeat sessions with ketamine, and maybe with those multiple sessions, you can kind of replicate this, but the point is a single dose versus a single dose. It may be true that psilocybin has a more long-lasting antidepressant effect. Yeah,
and still more research needs to be done, but this is the most consistent thing. Oftentimes with ketamine therapy, people will maybe be coming in once a week or, a little bit more often than psilocybin, every 3 months or something like that.
Yeah. So moving right on into smoking cessation. This is another one of the most common research benefits that a lot of people know about. A long-term follow-up of patients who were given psilocybin for smoking found that 60% were abstinent at the long-term follow-up. And at 12 months, that was 67%. So we didn't even see a big decline from 67 down to 60. So big results there. And they're much better than what we see with normal smoking treatments that are standardly used in medical practice.
Same with, when you talk about that typical smoking treatments, there's also similar research around alcohol use. And we see much higher efficacy with psilocybin than treatment centers or rehab centers.
Yeah, and out of the smoking cessation study, a whole 86.7% of participants found that this psilocybin experience was one of the 5 most meaningful and spiritually significant experiences in their entire life. That's pretty crazy.
It's pretty amazing when that's brought up, that statistic of, is this one of the most meaningful experiences? Because you see that in some older studies as well, from 2000, Johns Hopkins did a research program around this and found that, a significant amount of people put it in their top 3 most meaningful, whether the experience was positive or negative for them.
Yeah, it's a powerful experience. It's not something to be taken too lightly. This can be life-changing. So
exactly.
Yeah, moving on to end-of-life anxiety, end-of-life care, another pretty well-known one, I'd say. So this is when people are towards the end of their life and maybe they're struggling with some chronic condition like cancer.
Or stressed about dying. Yeah. And what happens next, right? There is a lot of fear in our culture around death and end of life. So this can be helpful with calming some of those fears, calming some of that anxiety.
Yeah, and some trials, administering psilocybin to these patients found greatly reduced anxiety, depression of 60 to 80% of the participants.
Yeah. And how long after, right? We're looking at relief of existential distress, even 3.2 to 4.5 years after psilocybin administration. So significantly long after that dosage.
And this may even translate back to that depression mechanism. We just haven't had a lot of these long-term examinations to know how long does this really matter in someone's life. And it might be, if it is one of their most meaningful experiences, it might be a greatly long-lasting effect. Yeah. And we might not even know.
And some of the reason for that too could be from this snowball effect that we see. So, right, looking at nature relatedness, when people go out and, there is causation now that we've seen in other research studies showing that psilocybin has some causation effect of increasing nature relatedness. Nature relatedness has many other benefits. And then again, when you have a stronger connection to nature, you are in nature more. And that also just helps with, reducing numerous medical things.
Yeah. Some other interesting stuff that comes out of this end of life care research is the effect on pain and chronic pain. And this should probably be its own category, its own video entirely. We will dive deeper in the future. But it's definitely worth noting that, like, out of these studies, they noted this big relief of chronic pain.
Yeah, which again, right, the clientele that they're looking like with this study is end of life care. So you oftentimes see a relationship between chronic pain and some of that end of life.
Yeah.
Continuing on with some other research benefits, there's also been studies done on eating disorders. And so again, there's a lot of preliminary research. There's not necessarily in causation showed yet. But there is preliminary research showing that promise in treatment of anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa and binge eating disorders in general with the usage of psilocybin. Yeah. And some of this, right, you can hear when people have done sessions, especially with that binge eating disorder, they just describe it as not having the drive to eat. It's just kind of gone a little bit. Not always with everyone, but again, this is right. Some people just describe it like that. Same with the smoking cessation. The drive to smoke is just kind of gone.
Or your life, you see it in a whole different angle. It's like you're looking at yourself from the outside sometimes, or you just can get a clearer picture of this habit is really not beneficial to my life. And it's powerful for people to be able to step outside of their normal framework of thinking.
Exactly. It gives us that opportunity, like you just mentioned, to step out of I call it creating our new normal, right? That's what we're able to do afterwards. Makes it a little bit easier maybe to create new habits and, step away from those things that we're wanting to change in ourselves.
Yeah. And the company Compass Pathways is currently working on a phase 2 trial using psilocybin therapy for anorexia nervosa. And within the next few years, there's going to be more data out about this.
Yeah. Lots more to come. So some other research benefits here, right? We can only cover so much in this video. We will do a deep dive in a lot of these different categories just to give a larger explanation on some reasons why, some ways to help encourage that maybe during your session. But some of the categories include anxiety, problematic substance use, chronic pain, PTSD, cluster headaches, and even OCD.
Yeah, and we also see some benefits for creativity, spirituality, nature relatedness, and IBS, and then in general, just an increase in neuroplasticity. And that's actually some of the underlying mechanism for what's happening when we take these psychedelic substances.
Exactly. And you may hear the term around 25 years old when the brain is fully developed. Our neuroplasticity naturally somewhat ends there. Past that point when we enter into that adulthood timeline, we now have to do things to stimulate neuroplasticity. Now, mind you, this can be stimulated by doing things not related to psychedelics.
Things like exercise, meditation, yoga. A lot of different things have shown increases in neuroplasticity, that ability for neurons to connect to each other.
Yeah. But psilocybin is an extremely potent way of creating neuroplasticity. We kind of see a little bit of a brain reset. We see new neural pathways being activated. It's really interesting.
Yeah. And some expected effects. So there's a lot to expect here. And it varies widely among users, but there's a lot of common themes.
So, we're looking at, with the eyes open, visual distortion, visual enhancements. This can mean color enhancements. Sometimes you may see some, wobbly lines around the room, different things, wavy appearances. And with the eyes closed in therapy, in psilocybin therapy, we often do this with an eye mask, because then you can have your eyes open or closed.
And it still is a fully black.
Exactly.
So you're allowed to see all these visuals that you see with a closed eye visual, and you don't have to think about keeping your eyes closed.
Yeah, because it's really hard to keep our eyes closed the whole time.
Yeah.
But it is like changing the channel. It's very different with the eyes closed versus eyes open. Still visual hallucinations going on with the eyes closed, but this does vary a lot.
Yeah,
with
potency as well.
Absolutely. All this is really relevant to the amount that you consume, the amount of psilocybin there that you're dosing with. So the more you do, oftentimes the more visual effects you'll have to an extent. And that's something that we can, even dive into more later on. But, with some of these visuals with that eye mask on, especially the way I describe it with clients is it takes a lot of those external visuals that we're having, those wavy lines, those color distortions, and sends it inward and really allows us to do some internal, some of that kind of psilocybin therapy that we talk about.
Yeah, and some of the things you do see with the eyes closed are like geometric patterns that are amorphous, which means like they don't have one specific shape that holds constant. They kind of spiral and move, and it's this constantly weaving image that you see.
Also, can be full-on visuals, right? This could be this could be memories, this could be just different visual creations, things that you're going through, but also can just be as simple as a geometric pattern or just colors, right? It's sometimes it's just colors going on.
And we can have stuff as intense as, seeing entities, meeting beings that have something to communicate with you about. And that's where it gets quite spiritual. And some people get quite shocked, about these experiences. So
again, I want to emphasize here too, that all of these different effects vary per experience and per person. So when you're going in, don't necessarily expect something to happen, because whatever you expect is going to happen, it's not going to be exactly like that.
Yeah, you can't plan the perfect trip. It's just going to go how it goes.
We can do things to prepare for it and really make sure it goes smoothly. But in terms of what you're going to see, what you're going to feel, that's going to vary per experience, per journey that you go through.
Yeah, a big thing that we do see is emotional enhancement. So not necessarily just the positive emotions either, but that is very common to feel like giddiness, laughter, joy, and even like a state of bliss.
Absolutely, yeah. And with these things, it's really good, no matter what you're feeling, whether it's sadness or joy, good to just go with what you feel during the experience, because that's going to be, where the psilocybin's taking you at that point.
Yeah.
Oftentimes these things are also that emotional enhancement is related to the music. So the music is going to have a big play here, making it more intense, making it a little bit lighter, more loving. It really is going to vary, but the music is going to have a big play on that.
Yeah, and some other things to expect, physical feelings. It's kind of sometimes it's called the body load, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. You can have increased sensation, really feeling like you're connected to the music as the music goes. And like you said, that different songs might totally affect your body differently too, not just your emotional state.
And sometimes even visuals, right? Sometimes people have a color relationship with the music going on.
Yeah.
Also touching on some of that physical feeling you can have, right? The whole experience can be more physical feeling than visual or than emotional. They're all kind of different ways that the experience can go. Sometimes it's more of an awareness, but yeah, you can be having a physical journey the whole time, right? It's where you need to go during the experience.
Yeah. So we already kind of touched on the music enhancement. You really feel like you're part of the music sometimes, and it's shaping what you see and what you feel, and it has a lot of power. So crafting a good playlist or having a good playlist selected is something that is done in the psilocybin therapy sessions that you do, that most facilitators will do. Music is a huge component of that.
Very important, and it can really take us places during the experience.
Yeah, some other things to expect are the time distortion and the ego dissolution.
Yeah.
Time distortion that can be either feeling like 5 minutes of real time takes hours. It can be like this dilation effect, which is kind of wild. You look back at the time and you're like, what? That was really 5 minutes? But it can also be the opposite. Sometimes people are like, oh, I only felt like I was in there for 10 minutes, but it was really 3 hours. So
exactly, yeah.
It
can go either way.
Either way. And don't expect one thing or the other.
Yes.
It could go either direction.
In every experience could be different. And oftentimes you see a little bit of these things overlapping during the experience, maybe a blend of time distortion expanding and contracting.
Yeah.
And then talking about ego dissolution, right? So ego dissolution, you oftentimes will hear about with psilocybin. when we actually look at some of the definitions of it, oftentimes when someone goes through a psychedelic experience, they have a little bit of ego dissolution. This might mean a shrinking of, how much you're really emphasizing your own problems and maybe focusing on just the world as a whole, right? We see this like oneness. That topic comes up a lot. Doesn't necessarily mean your ego is totally dissolving. You're, forgetting who you are entirely, or, all of that. You're also going to come back, right?
Yeah.
And when you're sober
always
again,
come back.
you need some of your ego, right? We have that ego to survive in society.
Yeah.
So that's not going to entirely disappear forever.
Yeah. You may have heard of the term ego death. And this is maybe to the extreme level of ego dissolution.
Yeah.
And it's something that some, psychonauts, these are people in the community that maybe take large doses of psychedelics and they are kind of chasing that ego death sometimes.
Yeah.
We don't recommend this at all, but it is something people are sometimes searching for.
Exactly.
And it's kind of unclear what an ego death really is.
I think we use ego dissolution terminology just because it's a little bit more accurate, I feel like.
Yeah.
Ego death, your ego, again, it's not going to die. It's going to come back. And sometimes even with the term ego death, you can see that people's ego actually get increased afterwards because they think their ego died.
Yeah, there's some people who come out of it and they think they're top of the world. And they think they've makes you see some magical things.
Yeah,
and
it's powerful.
But this can also lead to ego inflation.
Yeah.
So be aware of that.
So some of the risks and side effects, we actually did a deep dive into the most common side effects of psychedelics in general. We recommend you go check out that video too. But we're still going to briefly cover some of the ones specific to psilocybin.
Yeah, some highlighted ones here are the headaches, 2 to 66% incidence rate in the studies. Big range there, scales with dosage. Usually it happens afterwards. Nausea, a huge one as well, 4 to 48% of users. And we kind of say probably closer to that 48% is typical.
Most people have a little bit of nausea. Doesn't mean it's full purging, like you may have heard about, but there's oftentimes just a little bit of nausea somewhere along the line.
Yeah, and anxiety, 4 to 26% of users, a little bit less, but also quite a common theme. Have some level of anxiousness.
Because it's new.
During the come up.
Yeah, it's a new thing that you're going to be doing, oftentimes, and in psilocybin therapy especially, right? People are coming into work on things. They may be nervous about what's going to come up. And so we sometimes have anxiety that can then dissipate as the experience goes on. Yeah,
we also can see an elevation of blood pressure and heart rate. So these kind of go hand in hand. 34 to 76% of participants have that blood pressure elevation. And on average, that heart rate increase is about 14 beats per minute, which is relatively low.
And that can be related to some of the anxiety or intensity of the experience going on too. But that elevation of blood pressure is pretty consistent. And we just call it a moderate elevation of blood pressure. Right. So a little bit more general there. This is something to be aware of though, as a risk. If you have pre-existing heart condition or a pre-existing heart condition, you are a little bit higher risk. And this is when you need to contact and speak with some professionals, right? We're not going to give any direct medical advice here. So just talk with a professional. You could even talk to me outside of the session if we want, and go from there.
Yeah, exactly. There's also seen some temperature dysregulation, and this can be kind of feeling like coldness in the extremities or even too much warmth, and this can fluctuate even throughout the same experience.
Oftentimes fluctuates.
Yeah, it's usually not one or the other. It can be sometimes you're really cold, you want to put on a blanket, and then the next moment, sometimes it seems it's like almost instant, like, oh, okay, now I'm hot. Like I gotta take off this blanket or take off the clothes or something.
Totally. You're wanting to shed some of those layers, and you may not even really be able to change some of that temperature. Like if you are feeling a little cold, we'll pile on some blankets, but it may not actually make you feel warm because again, it's dysregulating how we feel that temperature. But the pressure can be nice just to know that it's there. So
another thing to note is there is a risk for people with active psychosis. So this is somebody who's actively going through some sort of psychotic episode due to bipolar or schizophrenia. Definitely not good to give somebody who's actively going through this a psychedelic substance.
Yeah, because it can increase what you are feeling and going through in general. Kind of turn that up, and we don't want to do that with psychosis. Just simply.
But people with more like remissed levels of bipolar and even borderline personality disorder, these are yellow flags, is what you've referred to them as.
So it's a kind of a case-by-case basis. right? When is the last time you had kind of an episode, maybe of psychosis, mania? And then also, what kind of support system do we have in place so that in case some of this were to go on, you're able to get through it? And so, again, very case by case. That's why it's a yellow flag. Unlike that heart condition, right? That's more of a red flag.
Where you definitely need to consult with somebody.
Yeah.
Medically.
Yes.
So
definitely.
Yeah, and then some other things are the vasovagal syncope, and I think you know a little bit more about this.
Yeah,
as a
so
risk factor.
This is when you can faint due to the overstimulation from emotion, also from the side of blood, right? People commonly have this.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're on psilocybin, right, we have a lot of that intense emotion. And so when somebody has, vasovagal syncope, they may look dead when they've consumed psilocybin. From the facilitator perspective, good to know going into it. This is, again, kind of a yellow flag there, something to consult with, but definitely something to talk and know before you do psilocybin so that, whether it's the person sitting with you or just you might have some, unique reactions.
Yeah, and the last big thing to note here as a risk is prescription lithium. So this actually came out of anecdotal reports of people having seizures when they were prescribed lithium and then chose to take psychedelic. And this extends beyond psilocybin. This includes all of the serotonergic psychedelics.
Big red flag here.
Big red flag.
Prescription lithium. It is different than over-the-counter lithium because of the potency of that lithium
the sheer
itself.
Dosage of elemental lithium that you consume through the prescription format, much higher than what's in a lithium orotate supplement.
Yeah, you can get there if you consume too much. But we're really talking about that prescription lithium here as a major red flag. Do not consume psilocybin with prescription lithium. We see seizures. Just very unsafe.
Yeah, and moving on here to administration, dosing, and the duration of psilocybin. So the only route to consume this is orally. Do not go out doing any other things. I don't know if I've ever heard of people trying this. Well, I have read some horror stories, but just orally.
Don't smoke it, just eat it, right? And that form of oral consumption can vary. Sometimes we see, especially now with this legal industry emerging, right? There's honey extracts where you can consume it through honey. People drink it in tea. People eat the mushroom, right? There's all these different ways. There are also other extracts that people will be, coming out with more of a synthetic version. That's not what we're diving into as much today.
Right, but this still would be how you consume those.
Yeah, still orally. Also talking about, potency, right? What is a common amount? Oftentimes people are taking 10 to 45 milligrams of psilocybin. That's definitely a macrodose. Even lower than 10 milligrams is still a macrodose, but oftentimes we see 10 to 45.
Yeah, and for many strains, this falls in the range of 1 gram of mushroom up to like 3 to 5 grams of mushrooms. As we said earlier, big differences in strain potency. So if you're going through the legal industry, they know all this information. They've done lab testing on this. But if you are outside of the legal industry doing this yourself, try to understand some differences between the strains that you're consuming and try and really make sure you know roughly how much psilocybin you might be ingesting, because it's a big difference.
And that duration is going to vary between 4 and 6 hours. When we talk about some of the smaller ones, you can even get down to 2 hours or 1 hour, and getting to that microdose range.
Right.
But 4 to 6 hours is the most common for that kind of full 10 to 45, that maybe even 20 to 45 milligrams experience. And higher doses do make it last longer. Also doing a second dose, right? Also known as a booster dose. If you take that after you've already consumed some, it's going to extend the amount of time that you're feeling it. All right, that duration. Now we're going to talk a little about half-life of psilocin and psilocybin. And Reed, if you want to explain what half-life is to the audience.
Yeah, so half-life is just the time it takes for a substance to clear halfway out of your system. So for half of the substance to clear. This is also used in like radioactive decay. So for half of the material to decay, the time it takes for that to happen. Very similar principle here. So when it comes to like psilocin,
we're looking at, for psilocin, a 50-minute half-life, and for psilocybin, 160-minute half-life. So that means that half of the drug psilocybin and psilocin are out of your bloodstream at that 50-minute and 160-minute mark. Which is really interesting. This is very fast. And so complete psilocin excretion occurs within 24 hours. And this is, important information. A lot of people ask about this because it is a Schedule I drug at the federal level still. But knowing that, right, complete secretion being within 24 hours is just good information to know for those interested.
Quite fast compared to other substances.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then some very interesting stuff that came out of Rose City Labs in Portland, Oregon.
One of the main testing labs for the legal industry. They test a lot of the manufacturers' mushrooms, randomized amounts, and then that's how we know how much psilocybin is in it, oftentimes psilocin, and even some of that norbaeocystine, baeocystine.
Yeah, so this first graph we're going to look at here is a kind of an overview of different liquid formats of psilocybin consumption. So the blue bars there, that's if you just put the mushroom into water as a tea without any additions of lemon juice or anything. So it's just plain water, and you see even at 5 minutes of this mushroom being in the water, the total psilocin content. So they're adding up here psilocybin plus psilocin and doing a little bit of math in this process to get the total potential psilocin that the body sees.
And which is that active ingredient, remember, that psilocybin converts into psilocin.
Exactly. So yeah, with regular water, we see that total potential effect declining, and you can see immediately. And at 60 minutes, it's almost completely gone.
Yeah, and that's the total potential psilocin. So this is a major important factor, right? If you were to wait 60 minutes, that means most of that psilocin in the product is going to be gone. Yeah. Right? So you're not going to get much of an experience from it.
So if you're slowly sipping on a tea and there's nothing else added to this tea other than water.
And temperature does play a role.
Yeah.
But we'll get into that. But continue. So
you might really decrease the potential efficacy of this experience.
And looking at the graph, right, if you do want to slowly slip on it, which is totally reasonable, maybe use a different liquid substance, a different container for those mushrooms. So we look at the graph, we see orange juice, cola, and lemon juice. And those all are pretty dang good at maintaining that total potential psilocin between 5 minutes, 15, and 30, all the way to 60 minutes. You'll notice that the orange juice actually maintains the most total potential psilocin on this graph until the 30-minute mark, at which point the lemon juice takes over. Remember that there can be some error with these because, it's being done by humans, right? How they're testing this.
Right. So, we'd almost want to say that orange juice and lemon juice are probably on par with each other.
Yeah, very similar.
They're very similar in what's happening is this acidity is, helping preserve the molecules.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then if we go on to the next graph here, we can get some more specifics on the differences between orange juice and lemon juice.
So really interesting, looking at the orange juice graph, you can see that at 5 minutes, the psilocybin is actually undetectable, right? So the amount of psilocybin is undetectable, but the psilocin is at the maximum amount. So total psilocin is really high already at that 5 minutes. It peaks at that 30-minute point. Again, could be due to some error, could be due to some other things going on, but there's no psilocybin that's detectable at 5 minutes. So it's immediately converting that psilocybin into psilocin. So just to give a little emphasis here too, that means that if you were to consume this product out of orange juice, you're probably going to be looking at a steeper climb.
Right. Faster onset.
Maybe a higher peak moment during the trip itself.
Yeah, and possibly even a shorter total duration.
Yeah.
Because your body's not doing that psilocybin to psilocin conversion. The orange juice is doing it for you.
Yeah.
So, and then with lemon juice, we see that over time, the psilocybin is still being turned into psilocin, but it's much, much slower. So, even at 60 minutes, we still have quite detectable levels of psilocybin.
Yep.
And you add up that psilocybin plus psilocin with the extra math in there, you still get a good yield at the end.
Yeah. So total psilocin is pretty consistent throughout the 5 minutes to 60 minutes for both orange juice and lemon juice. You'll just notice that with that orange juice, like we talked about, maybe a higher peak, shorter duration. Lemon juice, maybe more of a normal duration.
Yeah.
Still possibly an increased peak, maybe a little bit shorter.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're kind of still increasing that fast onset with the psilocin, but your body's still doing some conversion. So it's a bit of a middle ground between straight up consuming the mushroom versus doing orange juice.
And really just maintaining that psilocin, potential psilocin content.
Right.
Now hopping into these next graphs right here. So this is just talking about water extraction. And this is really important for people that are using water that are possibly using tea And so the top graph here is 80 degrees Celsius water extraction. The bottom graph is 100 degrees Celsius. But highlighting the top one, we notice that with that 80 degrees Celsius, the psilocybin milligrams per gram, so that's milligrams of psilocybin to overall grams of whole fruit, right? That is much lower at the 5-minute point than that bottom chart with 100 degrees.
Yeah. So we're seeing that kind of instant conversion situation again. And then also a faster decline in the total psilocin.
At 80, right, to emphasize too. Yeah. So at 80, right, we see it go from 2 at 5 minutes all the way down to a little bit over 1 of that psilocin content.
At 60 minutes. Right?
At 60, at 60 minutes. So between 5 and 60 minutes, a significant decrease in that total potential psilocin, milligrams per gram.
Yeah, and with the 100 degrees Celsius, this is boiling, 212 Fahrenheit. We see some preservation of the psilocybin at the start, but we still see that converting over, and we still do see some loss in total, but much less loss compared to the 80 degrees condition.
Yeah, and you might notice the graph, there are some negative values there. That's actually just 0, but how it's displayed, it goes negative. Some
detection errors there.
Yeah, you also may notice that at 80 degrees, right, at that 5-minute point, it's a little bit below 2 minutes. It's a little bit below 2. At the boiling temperature, 100 C, it is lower than that for the total psilocin, or psilocin milligrams per gram. But then by the end, it just maintains it better.
Yeah.
Just to highlight that.
So current accessibility of accessing psilocybin-containing mushrooms. There's only 2 states, one state currently, where you can go legally receive facilitated sessions, and that's Oregon.
Yeah, so under the Oregon Health Authority, they've created this legal Oregon psilocybin services framework. And so that's where you have licensed facilitators like myself, where we work with clients from preparation to administration to integration. And there's also service centers, which is where you go to consume the product. And then there are the manufacturers and the labs, like we talked about.
Yeah, and in Colorado, a very similar framework is being built right now.
Yep.
In 2025, there should be access. So it maybe mid-2025, summer. This can vary. They're still working on it right now.
Just like in Oregon, it took a few months before there was actually any clients being served. It's probably going to be similar in Colorado.
Yeah. And there's some cities across the U.S., actually quite a few different cities. One of the biggest ones is Washington, D.C., that have decriminalized naturally derived psychedelic use, including psilocybin mushrooms. So to expand on that, that includes DMT-containing plants like the ayahuasca mixture, the San Pedro cactus.
We have a video on all the legal psychedelics as well that you can purchase in the United States. Yeah. And so that you can check out. But again, outside of any legally administered use, medical research study, or use in decriminalized areas, psilocybin purchasing and consumption is illegal and at your own risk. So again, we don't encourage any illegal activity here. That's why we're talking about all the legal things and the legal ways to access this. But again, outside of those legal areas, it is illegal and still a Schedule I according to the federal government.
Exactly, yeah. So some other considerations here. In general, this kind of applies to all psychedelic experiences. Taking any psychedelic recreationally can be dangerous. Be sure to not treat these as just regular party drugs. I'd argue you probably shouldn't treat any drug as just like a regular substance to consume.
But specifically
this. Be sure to be very wary and do a lot of research. And that's what these kind of videos are for. We're trying to educate people on how to do these things safely, and everything they can expect, good and bad. So yeah, they can greatly enhance the mood of whatever environment you're in.
And so, something to highlight here that we can add in actually to the risks to, greatly enhancing the mood. This includes suicide, right?
Right.
Specifically, like if you have a plan, or if someone has a plan for suicide ideation, or, a plan to actually commit suicide, it can increase some of that. Now, mind you, suicide and ideation and things like that. Talk to someone in the legal industry. I don't want to give any legal advice here, but we can talk about that separately. having the thought once in your life or something like that where you've thought about suicide, not necessarily a major risk.
It's more the actively thinking about
having
this.
a plan. That's a big one. But again, this is case by case. If you are having some of those thoughts, consult with someone in the legal industry and get some good advice there before you continue.
Yeah, and on a little bit more of a lighthearted note, the enhancing of the mood of whatever environment you're in, this can be really good.
Yeah.
So that's why with the facilitated sessions, you set the ambience of the room.
Exactly.
Like maybe some essential oil diffusers,
Mm-hmm.
some really good calming music, the eye masks,
Yes.
comforting blankets, all these kinds of things.
Relaxation,
Yeah.
the love that you might feel or the connection and support that you have from your facilitator can really all be felt and enhanced.
Yeah. Yeah. And just, you have to treat your body, mind, and setting and surroundings with respect and care.
You hear this. Yeah, you hear this term set and setting a lot.
Yeah.
Right. So set is kind of the mood mindset that we're in. And then setting is where actually are we, right? Do we have access to a bathroom? And we're going to do a whole video on set and setting and how to create kind of the most ideal space, both internally and externally, for a psychedelic experience. And that'll come soon. Yeah.
And then another thing here is make sure you don't have any required obligations the day of your experience. Like you got to set aside the time for this. It's not something that you can just do and then go to a family dinner later.
Yes.
You want your own time and space with, someone who can maybe take care of you afterwards too. And even the day following, ideally, would be good to not have anything required.
Sometimes even longer than that. Sometimes people like to have up to a week. Of course, this varies per your schedule. Just good to give yourself the opportunity to really let this stuff integrate, let that experience integrate into your life.
Yeah, exactly. Some other tips here, just in general, it's really important to have an intention for what you're trying to accomplish with the experience. Like, again, this is not just a party substance, even though people do it like that. Like, if you're taking something this powerful, it's important to try and have some kind of intention and journal about it beforehand.
And that intention can be joy, right? It can also be to go through trauma. It can be to deal with anything we talked about earlier. But just having an intention is so important, and really processing that in advance so that during the experience, right, it's already at the forefront of your head. You don't have to think, why am I here at this moment? You've already processed a lot of it. So this can be done with journaling about it, talking about it, really just thinking through that intention.
Yeah, really important as well, or useful to have a music playlist selected and ready to go for the journey. You don't want to be fumbling around on Spotify trying to find a song in the middle of it. It's not very easy to access a proper phone during. So
yeah, and sometimes like as a facilitator, we'll also cue music kind of intuitively, but while you are currently feeling it, you don't want to have to cue something.
Yeah,
good to have that totally lined up, and maybe a couple options in case.
Yeah. If you want to switch it during, have something else ready to go.
Exactly. We want you to be in tune with the music.
Yeah.
There's a study done where being in tune with the music was actually more important than the amount
dosage,
you take, the dosage for that antidepressant effect. So we want you to be in tune with it.
Yeah, another thing here is to utilize essential oil diffusers. Something we'll eventually be coming out with as a product is some specific blends that are meant for reducing some of the nausea and stress associated with the situation. But this can include things like lavender oil, orange oil, and things like this. And it's not just necessarily the physiological response to inhaling these, but just the comforting scent can be nice.
Like a massage place, you often smell that lavender, and maybe it can take you back to a similar spot when you smell it again.
Yeah, and then a big thing that we want to shout out to is our pre-trip supplement coming out at the end of January. So this is really targeted to soothe the mind and the stomach and protect against the undesirable effects of the mushrooms.
Designed to counter a lot of those things that we talked about on the side effects page, but specifically, like Reed mentioned, to soothe the mind and the stomach.
Yeah.
So also feel free, right, for a good experience, schedule with a licensed facilitator. This is our job, right? This is what we're passionate about. I want to help people. I love to help people, and I'm really grateful to be in this industry. So if you have any questions there, always do a free consultation. You can reach out, and happy to set you up there. You want to, connect with whoever your facilitator is, whether it's in Oregon or anywhere else. I'm a big fan of just having a licensed facilitator there with you too. But you want to make sure you connect. And so maybe I'm not the specific person for you. That's okay. I'll make sure we can find the person that is. Happy to just talk to you and go from there.
Thank you all so much for joining us on our psilocybin deep dive. It was a long one, a lot of good information in here.
Yeah.
So
Wanted to be thorough. So remember to hit that like button, subscribe for future content, and comment with any questions, concerns, or requests for future content.
And remember,
elevate your trip.